Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we're going to hear from the Student Ambassador Program that the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association holds. But first, how about a little update on Hurricane Harvey? And we'll hear that from the medical community. And we have some other things planned. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host.
Well, here we are. We're back in the studio, and Dr. Danae Powers joins me. She is an anesthesiologist. She's the vice president for the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doc, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Terry.
Well, look, we can't have a show this weekend given the horrific events that have taken place in Houston and surrounding areas in East Texas and now moved on to New Orleans, an evacuation order for the city. You can't even imagine what those folks are going through. We've heard a lot from the first responders about the coordination. But one of the things we haven't heard a lot about are the pressure and the needs and the demands that all of this puts on the docs, folks like you who have to provide the critical medical services. How do you even conceptualize that, the massive nature of it?
It's hard to do. I mean, this is a historic problem, catastrophe that's happening in Texas and Louisiana. And I know all of us have those citizens down there in our thoughts and prayers.
Absolutely.
But when you think about what this is going to do to the disruption in the delivery of medical services, it's not really something that people can practice, but you try to have plans. You try to plan for something like this. And I think the medical community is aware over time. We hear of these stories that may happen in our own states, and we do talk and we do draw up ideas about what we need to do when something like this occurs. So what would happen is, I'm sure the medical community down there, first of all, they're trying to stay in touch. They're trying to take care not only of their families and their staff, but make sure that they get information out for patients. I'm pretty sure that a lot of those docs and nurses down there are letting the emergency providers know that they're available should assistance be needed.
And I presume they've had, I haven't heard much about that side of it. That's why we're talking about it right now, but I presume they're bringing physicians and other medical personnel from the surrounding areas that have not been affected, and perhaps even from places far away. Yeah,
I can tell you that we've had some things happen here in Pennsylvania with some flooding and storms in the past, and even as far back as 9/11. And I know what happened is there was an outpouring of volunteering on behalf of the medical community, both doctors and nurses, who called and said, we are available. And I'm sure that's going on down there. And I know that as a physician, physicians' offices do make plans about what do we do to try to protect medical records, what do we do to try to give our patients continuity of care, how do I handle what my staff is going to be doing.
You've just brought up some really fascinating and important aspects of this. Okay, you treat someone and you can't spend an inordinate amount of time that you might normally, the normal amount of time, I should say, that you would spend with a patient. You might have 100 people waiting to see you. You treat them, but then it's the follow-up in this insane situation, that exists with where do you go? You're moving. These folks are being moved from one place. I mean,
part of what it is you try to get patients to understand too, prior to an emergency happening, that they should have plans. It's important to understand you plan for something like this, whether or not it's going to happen. And that means you have an evacuation plan. You know where you're going to go, or you have some idea of where you might have access to go.
Great point.
You try to keep track. I tell people, have a list of your medications. Think something on a card and have a week's supply at minimum of your medications that can easily be packed and taken with you.
I'm sure our viewers are paying close attention to this because it's not something we would normally think about.
The other thing is you don't have any guarantees that people will have access to your medical records or your medical provider in an emergency. Take a card, write down what your medical conditions are, because in the heat of the stress you may not even be able to verbalize it, but you have something that has a template that you can hand to people who might be caring for you. If you have aids that you need, something as simple as a walker or a hearing aid, make sure you can have those ready to take with you. Have extra batteries. These are the kind of things.
These are things that we normally wouldn't think about. I mean, because of this is such a an unusual and historic occurrence, as everybody has pointed out. You're exactly right. We don't think about that, but in a way, it only seems like common sense, but it's not.
Well, it's so out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, when have we ever seen this in our lifetime? So it's not something.
But we could have other disasters that require us. Particularly, I mean, you bring up medications. You bring up, do you need walkers? Do you need, do you need assistance getting? Do you have a plan how you're going to get out of your neighborhood?
Right.
You know,
and some idea of how to keep in touch with loved ones, so your loved ones know what your plan is, so that should they try to find you, they know what you are planning to do.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, related in a way is these new aspects of patient care, telemedicine. It applies more generally, but boy, does it ever potentially apply to this situation. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the show. Dr. Danae Powers is with me. She's an anesthesiologist. She's the vice president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. We just were reviewing the situation with doctors and medicine and horrible disasters of all kinds. But relatedly, I mean, it has a purpose of its own, but boy, relatedly is this whole subject of telemedicine. So what first of all, explain to our viewers, what is telemedicine?
Well, it's an attempt to use the modern technology so that individuals don't have to be physically present in the same room or the same place to deliver services to each other, so that a patient can get care from a specialist or a physician without having to be geographically close to each other. And we have the technology now to allow that to happen.
Yeah, so in other words, you could do it by phone, you could do it by, I'm holding this right up here, you could do it with FaceTime or Skype or some other way. So you could you could physically see the patient, so you get some sense about it. And no, I think that's a good point. But what the Pennsylvania legislature, there needs to be legislation to allow you to implement this more fully?
Right, yeah. Well, Senator Vogel has introduced a bill, and it has co-sponsors, and they're working with the Medical Society to try to put in place a structure by which we can deliver care to patients who would otherwise not be able to get it, either because of geography, weather situations, which is what's going on in disasters. Inability for the patient to travel, a limited number of specialists or medical resources in the area where they are, and that we can still bring the needed care to them by using this technique.
Any prospects? I mean, this doesn't sound terribly controversial to me, but I'll leave you out of this, but the Pennsylvania legislature can be a somewhat difficult place to navigate at times.
Well, I hope this isn't controversial. I think that everybody perceives there's a need for it.
Yeah.
I feel that it's kind of entering the modern era of technology.
And physicians are going to be very careful how they use it. I mean,
well, the legislation has been very carefully written to require that the physicians involved are qualified, they meet the same standards of practice need and licensing that would happen in a personal interaction, that the informed consent process is available,
that's a good point.
That we do have to keep
there are limitations to it, I think you would agree. I mean, there are limitations to it, but certainly in certain situations.
There are limitations, but the thing is, right now, more people are being impacted by lack of access to specialists and care than I think we realize, and this would really help alleviate that.
How many different ways can you say rural and small town America, and rural, and I know you're an expert in that area, that's an area of your coverage, and with the need to travel great distances to see a specialist, sometimes just to see a general practitioner. Am I right about that?
I actually see it a lot in my practice, that there are patients that cannot travel, they don't have the means, or they have something that's so unusual that the only specialist is in Philadelphia. And something like this would really improve the efficiency of care.
All right, before I let you go, I want to ask you, I don't want to make this too complicated, but there's another subject I want to ask you about, and that has to do with something called prior authorization.
Right.
And insurance and how all of that goes. We're just talking about emergencies, for gosh sake, but there may be other reasons. What's that all about?
Well, some years ago, insurance companies decided that they wanted to minimize what was called overutilization, and they instituted this process of prior authorization, which was a method that said if a doctor wanted to order a procedure, a surgery, or a medicine on a patient, and there was a concern about overutilization, it couldn't happen until the insurance company had approved it.
Yeah.
And initially, it was, I think, there were reasons why that was implemented. The problem is the pendulum's gone way too far down that road. And a study by the AMA shows that over 90% of physicians now feel that patients are having necessary care delayed because of the paperwork and bureaucracy that goes into prior authorization. And again, we're looking to the Pennsylvania legislature, Representative Quinn and co-sponsors, to try to put legislation in place that brings some sense of balance to this process.
And your point would be that the longer there's a delay in the patient getting service, badly needed medical services, that only hurts the patient. Am I
Absolutely.
wrong about that?
And the thing here is it's a delay in necessary care.
You're right.
So this is care that's needed. The doctors, the patients, they need the care, and this process is delaying its delivery.
Right.
And it's exposing people to potential harm as the care is delayed.
So your point would be that it's gone too far. It's not that you don't think there should be prior authorization. You just think that the pendulum has swung too far.
Oh, it's gone way too far.
Look, I want to thank you. It's great update, very, very timely. When we come back, we're going to talk with, millennials are doing some great things. We're going to talk about one of them with our friends from the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Well, you hear an awful lot about millennials. That's at 18 to 34, 35-year-olds. We have one of them sitting across from me right now, Angel Rivera. He's the 2017 Credit Union Ambassador, and of course, Patrick Conway. He heads the aforementioned organization. Well, I'm going to start with you, Angel. I want to tell you, there's a lot of people who, they're not quite so sure about your generation. I'm sure you've heard that. You're entitled, you're spoiled. I have a very different view of that, spending my life on a college campus. I think the young people I deal with are great. And you're going to run the country anyway. There are 80 million of them. So you apply for this. I'll let Patrick talk more about it in a minute, but what motivated you to even get into a contest to be a youth ambassador?
So you get to learn a lot about credit union philosophy, history, and operations, but even more so than that, I really wanted to go outside of my comfort zone, do things like public speaking, networking, and do things like that to sharpen my communication skills, and that'll hopefully help me in the future for my career.
All right, you and I have talked about this over the years. What's this program all about? Why do you do it? Well, first of all, what's it all about?
Well, it's really about recognizing the youth leadership and the credit union movement. And we've done this, the Credit Union Association, for over 40 years.
Wow.
And it's for young, youth and young professionals anywhere from 17 to 25. And they compete at the chapter level. This year we had 11 chapter winners, and they compete then at the state level at our statewide convention, which was held in Hershey. Angel was our winner this year, and will be representing the youth in the credit union industry or movement over the next year as an ambassador. And really, it's a great way for the industry to get young folks engaged and for us to recognize the key role that they play. And as you pointed out, Terry, there are future leaders for the country. So.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to get personal with you. How old are you? Can I ask you?
Yeah, I'm 24.
You're 24. You don't look it, but they say that. Neither does he. None of us. I'll move on. But to get a more serious note, you're 24 years old. Were you looking for a career? Were you looking for a vocation? Is this what sort of moved you into this?
I am kind of like in that quarter life crisis range where I kind of trying to figure out how I can make a difference, where I can go, and this is definitely something that's helping me a lot to learn a lot and move forward. So
that
I'm really
makes
happy
it.
for it.
Now, when you do this program, have you kept track of your previous ambassadors at all? Do you know? I mean, I would presume that all of them go on to be pretty successful in their careers.
They do, and we do track them, and I think many of them have stayed in the credit union movement or have moved into other industries, but they've generally been very successful. It's a rigorous competition that involves interviews with judges, a speech in front of hundreds of people, and an exam really about the philosophy of the credit union movement and what makes credit unions different. Being nonprofit financial cooperatives. Sure. So it's really, people who go through the program, it's rigorous, it's a great experience for young folks, and generally I think it helps develop their careers as well.
Now I'm going to get complicated, and you're going to help us straighten all this out.
Okay.
You have here in the information that I received about what you do and all that, widgets.
Yes.
You got to explain this to most folks. Maybe it's me, but come on.
Yeah, Widget Financial, that's the credit union that I work for. We were getting confused a lot with another credit union in town because we had a similar name, and people weren't really sure if they could become members because we were the General Electric Federal Credit Union before.
I got it.
So Widget kind of became the name that they chose, and everybody knows us for it, so that's good.
But normally you have to also be careful when you think of widgets, you think of something else, right? Other than a credit union. So you can be an ambassador on that, getting that all straightened out. So you're from Erie, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, and obviously an old industrial town that has had some modest recovery. Is that accurate given what you do and what you see?
Yeah.
From not just from the recession, but from the loss of the old manufacturing. Go ahead.
I've only been there for about 6 years. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, but ever since I've been there, I keep hearing, Erie's just behind the times about 10 years. In about 10 years, we're going to start doing what other people are doing, and generally it seems to be true. But it's still up and coming. It just takes a little bit slower.
We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what your goals are. And I want to tie this to something that Pat and I have been talking about over the years, and that's this whole business about financial literacy. It's probably something that we need to stress more in schools than we do. And I understand how crowded the school curricula can get. So we'll be back. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
All right, I have in front of me the head of the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association and their student ambassador, Angel. Let's talk a little bit about financial literacy, financial education. What role do you play, and does your association play in all of that?
So Widget, my credit union, actually is very involved in after-school programs. We're able to reach youth that way and teach financial literacy so that they learn those skills. But mostly, a lot of the students that we reach are actually at-risk youth and refugees, which are two groups that could really be benefited by having a credit union. Yeah,
absolutely. So do you, when you do this in a practical sense, do you go to the schools for after school? Do you have them come to you? I mean, how does that actually work? I think folks would like to know that.
Being a youth ambassador, I've been able to go with our business development team to schools and actually experience it firsthand, so I've been doing that as well.
Okay, and if you estimate how many students do you see in a year? Oh, you answered the question like too many, not too many, but you get. I'm sure you'd like. Yeah. Is this something, Patrick, that can be expanded? You and I have chatted about this again, about this program. As someone who spent his whole career in education, there is no doubt its significance. Is it expanding?
It is. It is. I think in the credit union case, we're in about half of the state's 500 school districts. Wow. So in school branches that financial institutions, that credit unions have on premise, or folks going into the schools after hours to help provide financial education to kids. We do financial reality fairs, which Angel's Credit Union has been very involved with up in Erie, where it's sort of a fun way. People get a job and a salary, and they've got to determine how to spend their money on housing and transportation and cell phones. And so really, it's a great way to just develop the financial skills of young people. So
and I would imagine, Angel, that a lot of, we all have to be careful, regardless of our age. I think we would agree with that, making important financial decisions. And,
absolutely.
But you need to do this. The younger you can get into it and understand it. Now, you have to be grade level parent and approach, right?
Yep.
But so what sense about that? Are people receptive to this?
Absolutely.
Because they're worried about their own money. Go ahead.
They are, yes. I just went to a conference just a few weeks ago. They were talking about how millennials are overconfident but undercapable. And
let me get that straight. Overconfident but undercapable. Go ahead.
Yep.
Finish
so
your thought.
Financial literacy is something that they definitely need, and even younger than that, the next generation, my brother and sister are that generation, and they ask me questions all the time that I just can't even imagine not knowing.
Well, I mean, the other thing, Pat, it's just gotten so complicated. I mean, like this thing, you have a contract for it. You know, how much does it cost to get it? I mean, I'm just talking about one little aspect, but we've got this hugely expansive network of financial concerns and needs, right?
That's a great point. It's a much more complex world than it was when we were kids, and helping people develop the skills that they need to succeed is important.
Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.